Hey there, it's Imu. Today I'm gonna talk about writing on different types of papers. I've been collecting all different types of paper. First, there is the standard white rice paper. I have this one, and then there's another collection. It's also white paper. You can see it's a lot. I bought this on Amazon. Okay, then I have the brownish one. This is a little bit brownish. And I have a yellow one with grid on it. A lot of beginners are wondering whether they can write on notebook paper or even newspaper, and they're sort of afraid that writing on this non-rice paper will form some bad habits. So I will also try on this two types of paper. At the end of this video, I will answer whether I think writing on these two types of paper will be bad for beginners. So if you're interested, keep on watching. Okay, I've got the brush and the inkstone, and the paper almost ready, except that this paper might be too big. So I just wanna cut it. So for hard paper, like the notebook paper or whatever, people like to use scissors or they even use the hands to split it. But because the rice paper is pretty soft, it's really hard to do it that way. And if you use scissors, it might not get that straight. So a very convenient way is to use a knife. Be careful when you are using it because the knife is always dangerous. First fold it, decide where you want to cut it, fold it, and press really hard. And then do it like this. You hold it here and do it carefully. This is really easy and fast, and you see the line is straight and it's relatively smooth. Okay, and we set aside the knife, and now let's try with this different paper. There are two white ones and a yellow one. Let's write something with a lot of ink. So first, maybe with a little bit ink. When the ink is little, then there might not be a lot of difference. Let me just write the number 1. Oh, and you see something is off here, and that's because I spilled some water there ahead of this, so that's why it expands and smears here. Try on this one. Okay, I believe that I've got the same amount of ink, but you see the left-hand side one expand a little bit on the edge. But this right-hand side one doesn't expand, except for here. What about this one? Okay, so there's a bit of reflection here. You see, it's still holding some water or some ink, but it's not smearing at all. Like the edge is pretty clear. And if you look here, there's not a lot of reflection. Also this one, no reflection. Now let me try with more ink. I definitely got a lot of ink. Let's see. So you see, it's expanding now at the beginning and at the end, because that's exactly where I'm pressing my brush. And it's expanding because I put a lot of ink. Let's try this one. Still a lot of ink. It's also expanding here. But what about this one? A lot of ink. And you see it's even reflecting now. that means there's a lot of ink here, but it's not expanding at all. That's super interesting, right? Now this time I'm gonna soak it with a lot of ink. It's almost dripping off. And let's write. Okay, let's see. This one, after you just write it, there's no reflection at all. For this one, after you just write it, there's no reflection because the ink is absorbed by the paper and it's expanding. I would say for this paper, the expansion is much more obvious than this one. So that means this paper can absorb the ink or the water much easier than this one. Let me even try with more ink. Oh, it's even dripping. Can you guys see it? Okay, this can better demonstrate it. The stroke is not smearing at all. Okay, so now hopefully you guys can see the difference between this paper. The ultimate difference is how well this paper can absorb the ink. For this one, it cannot absorb at all. For this one, it can absorb well, but not as well as this one. So people might ask, then which one's better? Well, I think it totally depends on your preference. Some people really enjoy the paper which absorb the ink or the water well. For some calligrapher, they even want it to show this sort of effect where it's kind of blurry. And they want to play with the ink expanding by themselves and the feeling there. Yeah, they just really like that kind of property, I would say. But for some other calligrapher, they just want their character to be really neat. Like this, like you see, it's still holding the ink pretty well with a very clean edge. So they don't want to have this expanding property. They just want very clear edges of their stroke. So they will prefer this one. Okay, now let's move on to comparison with the notebook paper and the newspaper. Do you think the notebook paper or the newspaper will absorb the ink well? So this is a random newspaper, and there are a lot of type of newspaper, and some of them has really smooth surface. They can even reflect. I wouldn't recommend you try out those one because for those one, the ink is on the surface. It's not into the paper. So I would say even for newspaper, let's go with those normal ones without the smooth surface. Let's try. And you see, it's reflecting. So it's definitely more like the yellow one here we just tried. Let me get a lot of ink. It's also reflecting. Got one notebook paper. It's again reflecting. They're all reflecting and they're all holding the ink. I've got another notebook paper. It's again reflecting. And if you look at the back, it's not filtrating through it. Like the back can barely, for this one, the back can barely see it. For this one, the back can see a little bit. For the newspaper, the back can barely see it. Right, it's pretty light. But for this two paper, this is the front and this is the back. It's filtrating really well. For the other one, the front and the back. So it's not filtrating as well as this one, right? For this one, it's the front and the back, not as well as the other two. Hopefully you guys have an idea. And if you're using a notebook or newspaper as a beginner to practice Chinese calligraphy, personally, I think it's totally fine. It's just that the paper won't absorb the ink well. You wouldn't learn how to control the amount of ink. And later, when you start with this type of rice paper, you need to know how much ink you should use when writing it, because if you are using too much, then it will smear and it wouldn't look as nice. So I would say it's harder for you to write on rice paper compared with writing on the normal notebook paper or even newspaper. But as a beginner, if you just want to have a feeling of it and play with it, I think these are totally fine. There's another little factor, which is that if you feel the rice paper, there's drag there, there's friction there. But if you're filling the notebook paper or newspaper, it's relatively smoother. So if you're writing with this newspaper, it's really easy for you to write really fast. You just do things like this. But remember, calligraphy is all about the rhythm of pressing and lifting. So if you write it real quick, there wouldn't be any strength in a stroke. So you wanna sometimes be very slow and sometimes be fast and sometimes be slow again. And even when you are writing this fast period, you want there to be drag there. So it will never be like this fast. You should always inject your strength through the brush and to the tip of the brush and then onto the paper. So you always want something like this, but not something like this, because there wouldn't be strength in here. If you like this video, please give me a thumb up, and if you have some general question about calligraphy, feel free to comment down below, and see you guys next time.